How'd you first get into music?
When I was growing up, right, like I had like an interesting childhood, right, like to say the least, right? Like, it's kind of a little bit messy, right? Because for example, right, like my parents were like super different, right, like from one another. Like I don't really know how to explain that, right, like in a good way that it actually kind of like makes sense for you guys, right? Because I'm from Mexico, right? So I guess the best way, kind of like my dad was more kind of like an type of scholar type of dude. Like imagine like a Harvard dude marrying someone, right, like from like a very low class, right, like neighborhood, right, like very bad, right, like not a lot of education. My mom, right, like just had like I think not even like high school, right, like her high school diploma, right, but he wanted like to have kids. So when this shit, right, like went down, right, because my dad wanted like to have kids, right, like they had like a lot of problems, right, like here and there. So my mom used to beat me up, right? Like she came from a different like background, right, like back then, right? Like parents used to like beat the shit out of their kids, right? So and my dad was always working, right? So I first started like listening to music, right? Like I found like these like Walkman, right? Like tape, right? Like and I started listening to whatever tapes I could find, right? Like but back then here in the 90s, right? Like in Mexico, it was mostly all about like dance music, right? Like what is love, right? Like that type of deal, right? Like bullshit like that, right? So I was listening to that sort of stuff, right? Like in just to avoid, right? Like having to listen to them, right? Like or to hear like all their problems, right? Like in fighting and whatnot, right? Like, so I remember like just getting into a car, right? Like and listening to that kind of shit, right? Because that's what was on. But my dad, right, like he grew up like in the 50s, right? Like so he was born like in 46 or something. So he grew up like listening to rock and roll music, right? So he knew everything, man. Right? Like, I kid you not, right? Like he knew every single little piece of music, right? Like from the 50s until the day he died, right? So it's 50s, 60s, 70s. So whenever he was home, right, like he would play like fucking Beatles, right? Like shit like that, like Led Zeppelin, right? So he loved that kind of stuff, right? Like even like from the 50s, like uh, Gene Vincent, right? So Buddy Holly, things like that. So it was cool, right? Like, but as a kid, like you don't really care, right? Like I like learning, right? Like you're discovering what you like, right? Like when I first got kind of like into middle school, that's when I discovered like punk rock, right? Like, and I'm not telling you like, oh shit, right? Like I discovered like this crazy band. Like I first heard about punk rock by listening to Blink 182, right? So it was like the very first punk rock thing that I heard, right? Like, and I was like, shit, right? Like this is really good, right? Like, and I was like, I don't get this, right? Like, this is fast, right? Like, this is pretty neat, right? Like, and then a friend of mine, right? Like, he discovered the Offspring, right? And we're like, shit, right? Like, this is cool, right? Like, then we started like figuring things out on our own, right? Like listening to Green Day, right? Like NoFX, right? Like shit, like that, like going little by little, right? And I remember, right, like at one time I was listening to something in my bedroom, right? And I think it was Goldfinger, right? And my dad came into my room and he was like, "So, are you into punk rock now?" I was like, "What?" Right? Like I didn't know what it was. Right? Like I didn't even know it was like punk, right? Because to me it was kind of like dudes with the mohawk, right? Like all that kind of stuff, right? Like so I was just listening, right, like to these bands, right, like wearing like shorts, right, like and the crook hats, right, like and bullshit like that, right? So I it didn't cross my mind, right, that that was like punk rock, right? Like so until he told me, right, like, and he was all right. So now you're listening to punk rock, and then that's how he started like playing like the Clash, right? Like and I freaking love Clash, right? Like that's my ultimate, right, like band, right? Like Clash, Ramones, right? Like Sex Pistols, right? Like going to the basics, right? Like going old school with that, right? But also like kind of like proto punk bands, right? Like as well. Kind of like because he knew everything, right? Like that's the craziest thing, right? Like, he knew every little piece, right? Like about rock and roll music, right? Like, so that's how I first started like getting into music, right? And especially about punk rock, right? So that's kind of like how it went. And later on, right? Like I think um it must have been like 12, right? Like I think like probably like 12. I wanted like to start a band, right? Like with my friends, right? Like and whatever. Like we wanted like to get famous, right? Like in something, right? Like and we didn't have like any money. Like I grew up like in a decent kind of like household, right? Like a some all right, right? Like a house, right? Like an income, but it wasn't like my parents wouldn't get me like a freaking guitar like or anything, right? And I wanted to play drums. So I was like, shit, I want to start like playing drums and whatnot. Right? Like, and I remember going on vacation rather with my aunt, right? Like, and I was telling her dad, right? Like, and she was kind of like this hippie girl, right? Like super into that sort of stuff. Like, and she was like, all right, like, so how much like does like a drum kit cost, right? Like, and I was like, I don't know, right? Like, because I was clueless, man. Right? Like, I didn't know shit, right? So, and she was like, I'll give you, right? Like, and I remember this like super clear. She gave me like 1,000 pesos, right? Like back then, which is like nothing, right? Like it's probably, I don't know, man, like $200 or something, right? So, and I was like, all right, with this you can get like a guitar or something, right? Like maybe you can start like playing, right? Like with your friends, right? Like start your band and whatever. Like, and I was like, fuck yes, right? Super excited about that. So I came here, right? Like, and because I didn't know anything, right? Like I haven't like touched an instrument before, right? Like we had like an old acoustic guitar with like two strings at home, right? Like, and that was it, right? So it wasn't like as a kid, right? Like I was like, oh yes, let me get into this, right? So we went right like to a tianguis here, which is kind of like a flea market, right? So we went there, and there was this guy right, like with just like some old guitars, so like it's some whatever guitars. So again, I remember like, hey, what can I get right like for this amount of money, right? And he was like, just this one, right? Like, and it was like the cheapest like red guitar, like it's like I remember it's called Rockwood, right? Like I don't know what brand that is, right? Like or anything, right? Like, but that was the thing, right? Like, and I bought that, right? Like with the money I had, and I came home and I didn't know that you had like to get like an amplifier, right? Like for that thing to work, right? So that's how bad I started this, right? But I just wanted like to play, right? Like and get into that. So hi, Cat. So I remember. Uh, Nice cat. I remember
Oh,
like
thank you.
just like plugging in right like into the like my stereo, my home stereo, right? Like and I think I broke like the freaking like like the heads or whatever, right? Like so then later on got like a proper amp, right? Like which was like borrowed from a friend. Like it wasn't actually mine, but he had it at home, right? Like, and he was like, right, there you go, right? Like, and he used to come here and play, and that's pretty much how everything started, man.
Awesome. Awesome.
None of us can change. None of us can change. Get change. You're dead. Get change. None of us can change. Get change. You're dead. Get change. None of
All
us
right.
can.
So, was Restless Anger your first musical project then?
No, man. No, like I think like my very first, like one of the very first bands that I got, like was a shitty band called Gusto, right? Like Gutterman's like record, right? Like Gusto, right?
Gusto.
Like and
Yeah, yeah.
we always find that like at least here, right, like in Mexico, I think like other people, right, like from other countries, right, like can relate, right? Like that's kind of cool, right? Like when you hear like a word, right, like saying like your own language, right? Or that a band like sings something, right, like in a different language, right, like in whatever. So it was cool, right? Like, and I love that record. Like, even now, like, it's not their best, right? Like, it's really bad, right? Like, but I always found that amusing, right? So we called this band like Gusto, right? Like, and it was kind of cool, right? Like, it was like the first serious thing that I got, right? Like, and we are just like a three piece of dudes, right? Like, and we had like this super sick like bass player, right? Like he was amazing. Like the dude was like very talented, right? Like back then, but he was like into metal, right? Like and when I was first starting, right, like punk and metal were like very separated, right? Like you wouldn't mix one and one like together. Like, and I remember like getting into shitty arguments, right, like at school, right? Like metal is better, like and punk rockers don't know how to play, right? Like like yeah, but we have more spirit, right? Like and we get drunk, right? Like or whatever it was, right? Like so we had like this guy, right? Like he was into metal, right? Like so he was listening to Slayer, right? Like Anthrax, like shit like that. And it was cool, right? Like and I liked that, right? Like, because of that time. So and he didn't really want to play punk, right? Like because he was above that kind of bullshit, right? So we kind of did right, like a weird mix rather between like punk rock and metal, right? Like because and I feel like back then, like it must have been something more like kind of like power violence-y type of deal, right? Like, and we didn't even know that, right? Like, we're just like kids, right? Like, just playing music, right? Like, so that was kind of like the first thing, right? Like, but Restless Anger was kind of like the only kind of like, and even right, like Anti-Venom is not successful by any standards or imagination, right? Like, or whatever, but Restless Anger was even less than that, right? But it was kind of good, right? Like at the time. And I remember like getting into a few cool shows, right? Like I think we opened up like for Wolf Brigade, right? Like or Wolfpack, right? Like I don't remember like which one it was, right? Like, but it's kind of good, right? Like, and that was kind of like the very first thing, right? Like that kind of like started like to get some traction, right? Like at least here, like in the scene, right? Like in that's around the time like that I started like getting into like playing as Anti-Venom, right? Like, and it was probably I'd say like 2007, 2008, right? Like somewhere around those times. Like that I started like working right, like in some other music, right? Like, and kind of like trying to figure out like how to use like a computer right, like to make the music that I wanted, right? Like, because before then, right, like I was always trying like to adjust right to somebody else's style. Like, all right, let's get into that, or like let's play whatever you want, right? Like, and I'll add my own shit right here, right? Like, but it was like never something that I had created on my own, right? Like I was always adjusting, right? Like, and I was trying like to figure things out, right? Like, so I started kind of like playing around like with the computer. We had like this very rough old computer, like it was like Pentium 3 or whatever, right? Like at home, I couldn't run anything, right? Like any software like to record or shit, right? Like, so I got like this pirated version, right? Like of FL Studio, right? And I started like messing around like with electronic music, right? Like, and I started like kind of like digging like a little bit into dance type of music, right? Like the type of shit that I was listening as a kid, right? Like, and that's kind of like how I learned, right? Like how to program, right? Like in a computer. But then I was like, all right, now I know how to do this, right? What can I do now with if I record like the guitar, right? Like, or if I record like the vocals, right?
So sorry to interrupt. So is
That's
that
right.
Ben Riley project? Is that what that ended up turning into?
That's it. That's it, man. You got it. Like when you told me about like like Restless Anger, like it, yeah, like the message like a few months ago, I was like, yeah, like he actually found this stuff, right? Like, so that's pretty neat, man. Like you go crazy hard, so that's really cool. I like that, man. So really appreciate it, right? Like, so that's exactly like Ben Riley. That was that thing, right? Like, and I was like just throwing like some beats around, right? Like, and trying like to figure out how to use a computer like to create the music that I wanted, right? Like without having like to rely on this person, right? Like or this person, right? Like, and it's it kind of like around that time.
Nothing but your nation state. We kill us all with no regrets. Because the straights are filled with hate. Dividing no hope for men. While you are whining, people dying. But you keep on believing shit. In our world, there's no place left to speak up high. With no regret.
Awesome. So but then you went on to form like full on started to make music with Anti-Venom. And I noticed that it was the Hollows collection said that some of the tracks date all the way back to 2006. Did you reuse some
Yes.
of that old material when you were started recording the Anti-Venom stuff?
Yeah, like and even like for example, like this is the most recent record, like a handful of nothing has like songs from way back when, right? Like that I like those songs, right? But I those songs like never turn into anything, right? Like create like until now, right? Like until like this point. So back then, right? Like I think like in the first AB record,
Was
I had like
Annihilation of the Human Rise?
yes, exactly, man. You got that, like, man. That's pretty
Yeah,
neat, right? So
around
it's like the
August
first.
of 2010. was what
That's crazy, man.
what I managed to find online.
That's pretty neat, right? Like, and yeah, right. Like, it was probably around that time, right? Like, if not like 2009, 2010. And it was just a demo, right? Like, they had like 4 songs, right? Like, just like a couple that actually made it, right? Like into the final record, right? Like, and a few more, like that were like cool, right? Like, and I remember that it was like MySpace era, right? Like, and back then, right, like, I was like super influenced by, right? Like, freaking like Choking Victim, right? Like Leftover Crack, right? Like the Stupid Henchman, right? Like I love those guys, right? Like so in Morning Glory, right? Like all that kind of stuff, right? Because they were also doing like their own thing, right? Like they didn't have like the biggest budget, right? Like especially like the Henchman, right? Like or Morning Glory, right? Like those very first early tracks, like it was like super trash recordings, right? So I
They
always
tried.
loved that. Yeah,
They
right.
tried. They tried.
Yeah, right. Like, but I like that, right? Like, and that was the thing that really like put me out there. Right? Like, all right, if these guys are doing this shit, right? Like, I want to do the same thing, right? Like, I want to be able, right? Like to kind of like do the same thing, right? Like, so that's kind of like how it started, right? So, and that was the first kind of like release, right? Like, it's Anti-Venom, right? Like, and that was the first kind of like release, right? Like it's Anti-Venom, right? Like, and I sent that to back then there was like this label, right? Like that was called like Riot Ska Records, right? Like in the UK, right? Like a big shout out like to Chris, right? Like whatever you are, buddy, like you're the freaking legend, man, right? So I sent that to Chris, right? Like, and I start bugging like other people, right? Like because of MySpace, kind of like Trusted Solution, right? Like from the cradle to the rave, like yeah, like that's my scene, man. That's what I love, right? So I started like messaging like these bands, right? Like these dudes, right? Like trying like to get some pointers, right? Like because they were all doing like basically the same shit, right? So and I got like a very cool message back, like from Chris, right? And he was like, "All right, like this is cool, man. Right? Like, are you gonna be releasing like a record or something? Right? Like, if you are, like, I'll put it out, right? Like, and I was like, fuck yeah, right? Like, let's go, right? So that's how like the first like Avery Regular came to be, right? Like, which is as soon as there is justice.
And released in December of 2010, December 27th,
Yes,
right? Which was an awesome release, right?
thank you.
So
Thank,
that's how that all went down. Like, but did you record all of it yourself, or?
yeah, man. Right? Like I told you, right? Like I had like this very shitty computer, right? Like it wasn't great. Like, and I didn't have like a lot, but like of like I didn't have like an interface, right? Like just to record. So I had like this super cheap like mic, right? Like that, like you just plugged it, right? Like into computer. Like it wasn't like anything fancy or whatever, right? Like so, and just straight up, right? Like into like this like kind of like DOS lunchbox, right? Like amplifiers. Like so that's how I record that, right? Like and I was doing like the drums, right? Like in FL Studio, right? Like in because my computer couldn't run the shit, right? Like properly, I had like to like do them like there, right? Like and then export that, right? Like so I could listen to the drums, right? Like and then I was using Audacity, right? Like this like super cheap like software like for recording, which is hands on like the best thing ever, right? Like still, right? Like till this day is great, right?
I
Are you
use
seeing?
I use it for my post editing process to balance out the audio and all the talking.
That's cool, man. It still works, right? Like it's a very good piece, right? Like of free software, right? Like and that's how I did that, right? Like with just this cheap ass microphone, right? Like I didn't have like anything else, right? Like so I remember I had to ask like a few friends, right? Like for a couple of pedals, right? Like you use some other things, right? Like with the guitar, right? Like and that's the same way, right? Like the vocals, right? Like and that's why they sound like super off, right? Because I didn't have like anything better, right? But I was like super proud, right? Like of that, like setup, right? Like and having like to create like an album, right? Like from scratch, like with just whatever I wanted to do, which was kind of like this kind of like Riot Ska, right? Like type of thing, right? Like something nasty, and I think that for me, right, like when it comes like to music, right, like in part, right, like of what I've learned throughout the years, right, like and whatnot, right, like is to me, punk rock, right, like, is just doing whatever the fuck you want, right? So that's it, right? Like, and I remember, like for example, like listening to Clash Records, right? Like listening to London Calling, I was like, this shit isn't punk rock, right? Like, and then I was like, actually, this is probably the most punk rock thing there ever is, right? Because these motherfuckers are doing whatever the fuck they want, right? They're mixing like jazz, they're mixing ska, right? Like they're mixing like everything that they can think of, right? Like, and they're putting this shit right into a record, right? And the same it was like for me, right? Like I was like listening to these different things. Like, and also I wanted like to put everything right, like that I wanted to into the style of music. And for example, right, like when I first started like getting into this type of like sound, or like the crack rock steady, whatever, right? Like I remember like listening to Chuck and Victim, right? Like from on the Epitaph website, right? Like, and they had only this song, right? Like, and it was like "Hate Your State," right? And I was like blown away by that shit, right? Because it was mixing like everything I love, right? Like freaking ska music, right? Like kind of like pop punk, right? Like type of in a way, kind of like this more grindy, right? Like metal shit, right? Like into the same thing. I was like, I love this, right? Like, so I always wanted like to do that, right? Like, so that's how like the first like AV record like came out, right? Like, because I just wanted like not to only kind of like emulate that sound, right? But it also kind of like in a sense like pay homage, right? Like to those guys, right? Because like they were paving the way, like whatever, right? Like you might think of them, right? Like right now, whatever it might be, right? Like 1999, right? Like early 2000s, right? Like that was legit, man, right? Like that was
Yeah.
something new, right? And even right now, right? Like you go back and listen to those records, right? Like, they're still good, right? Like regardless of whatever controversy or bullshit, right? Like there is out there, right? Like those records still are great, right? Like and even to those other bands, kind of like the Henchmen, like No Cash, right? Like No Cash is legit as well, right? Like that's fucking sick, right? Like all that kind of scene, right? Like, and I always this is just my head canon, right? Like, or whatever, like just me thinking, right? Like, and I always think about like that type of music, kind of like as this, like the fourth wave of ska, right? Like, because we start like like with the Boston's, right? Like, you get like some harder bands like the Suicide Machines, right? Like shit like that, like Link 80, right? Like that, like School, right? Like, and but what came after was our shit, right? Like, was all these different bands from all over the world, right? Like it was like a very small scene, right? Like, but very significant, right? Like I think.
And
So you had like
so much has come from that scene too. I mean, yes, Choking Victim and Leftover Crack made a like might have started the ball rolling, but like stupid henchmen, fucking night gaunts, and everyone just took that ball and just fucking rolled with it. And the shit coming out now is fucking mind blowing because you got like Corrupt Vision just throwing that fucking brutal metal in there, and then you
yeah,
got
man.
fucking you gotta love that shit, right? And fucking sorry, I got
That's it right now, no, dude. Like I feel you, man. And a big shout out, right? Like to my boy Tommy, right? Like from Curb Vision, right? Like, No Times Records, right? Like Homeboy is legit, right? Like he's amazing, right? Like a super duper amazing dude. The same goes right for the Night Guns, right? Like Paul, right? Like he's the man, right? Like, and I remember like messaging like Paul back in the day. We were gonna be doing like a cover, right? Like of this song, right? Like from the Henchman, right? Like it really makes me wonder, right? Like with that has like Dancing Devlin's vocals, right? We were talking about that back then. Right, like we tried it, right? Like it didn't work out like the best way, right? Like back then, but there's probably like some recordings, and I think like he released right like his version, right? Like later on, right? Like, but yeah, right? Like it grew, right? Like in terms of that, and still is, right? Like this crazy thing, right? Like as you said, right? Like there's so many bands, right? Like, there's so many cool projects right going on, right? Like that. It's even for me right now, it's kind of hard like to keep track of that, like because especially I'm not like super into like social media and shit, right? Like it's always kind of hard, right? Like I hate that, right? Like getting like, oh shit, I have to get into Facebook, I had to post this thing, or I had to get like into Instagram because it's not for me, right? Like I figured like super early on, right? Like I gave it a shot, right? And I was like, all right, just kind of cool, right? Like, and then you start seeing like all these crazy posts, right? From people, right? Like, and even people that you know is like, shit, right? Like this person is a fucking Nazi, right? Like what the fuck, right? Like you're like, right? Like just like conflicting, right? Like with crazy shit, right? Like that you see in there, right? Like and even like family members, I was like, I'm out. I don't want to know, right? Like I don't want to see, right? Like whatever you believe in, right? Like if you want to talk to me, just talk to me, right? Like send me a message, right? Like we'll get on the phone, we'll get on a call, right? Like I don't wanna, I don't care, right? Like what you're eating, right? Like that's it for me, right? But back then, right? Like that was the only way that we could do that, right? Like and it was super cool.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about Planet of the Apes, February 2012. That was a great EP.
Thank you, right? Like I appreciate that, right? Like and yeah, it was like the very first time that like I felt like there's always been like a continuous progression, right? Like I feel like with Anti-Venom, right? Like in terms of how it started, right? Like the different levels, right? Like not only right, like in terms of sound, right? Like, but also like kind of complexity of sound, right? Like how it starts like to become something more and whatnot. So you can tell, right? Like if you're listening to that EP, right? Like and you put it next to the first record, right? Like it's like ages, right? Like of difference, right? So back then I had like another computer, right? Like that could actually run software, right? So and it was fantastic, right? Like it was still like super helpful, right? But when it comes like to the guitars, like because I didn't have like a proper interface, I was still using like a shitty microphone, right? Like to do that, right? Like and just to record that. But now I could sit down, right? Like and actually listen, right? Like while I was mastering that shit, right? Like and while I was mixing that thing, and say like, all right, I should probably lower this down. Like I should probably remove this, right? Like from the mix, right? Again, also it allowed me, right? Like to start adding more effects, right? Like into like the guitars, right? Like the bass, the voice, right? Like and all the vocals and shit, right? Like, so it was pretty good, right? Like I think like one of my favorite like songs like to play live, right? Like is Symptoms of a Trading System, right? Like and back then, right? Like and just by by repeating that name right now, right? Like it's like I studied, right? Like I went to college, right? Like and studied sociology, right? Like so early on, right? Like I was like very like into political shit, right? Like and like fuck capitalism, right? Like and I had like super communist friends, right? Like and shit like that, like from college, right? I was like, yeah, fuck that, right? Like still, right? Like but I was like very politicized, right? Like in that sense, right? Like, so that very first Anti-Venom record, right? Like in that EP was like that, right? Like and it shows, right? Like I think like it kind of shows like when you go back, right? Like and read the lyrics, right? Like in what the messages are there, right? Like so it was a fantastic record, man. Right? Like that EP was pretty good. But that's my favorite song to play live, right? Like I don't think like people expect that, right? Like from AB, because it's super hard track, right? Like it has like this nasty like blast beat kind of shit, right? Like in there, and then it goes like into this crazy kind of like ska, right? Like kind of like Leper. Do you remember Leper? Are those guys still alive? Right? Like that was like the best fucking band ever, dude. That is great, man.
Yeah, yeah. But that was a fucking great EP. That was a great EP. And then you released later that year the part 2 generic single. That was a
Oh yeah.
yeah, that was I love like you said how as you go through your discography you can hear the progression in it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that was like a fun one, right? Like I think like at that time, but like I've never been like into like super like crazy solos and shit, right? Like I've never been that way really when it comes like to music because of that like super like punk rock like background. Right? Like I was trash like into like crazy like super virtuoso bands, and I was like Yeah, but there's other bands that can just like do an amazing song with 2 notes, right? Like so, but that's just me like being pretentious and a little bit of a dick, right? Like, I love that kind of like virtuoso shit as well, right? Like
Are you
so,
referring are you referring to the 2 note misfit solos?
yeah, dude, like that's fucking sick, man. Right? Like that, there's like I love right like there's this band right, like that's band like from the Clash as well, which is Big Audio Dynamite. Like there's like songs like with just 2 freaking like chords, right? Like and it's just repeating right like in a loop, and it's a those are fantastic songs, man. In those bands that just like hit the same fucking note, like and just bend it over, like and stretch it as far as they can. Like that's it, like the bossiest thing you could ever do, right? Like and nothing against like we're just I love like freaking mess, for example, like Atrocity Solution, like those guys like were fucking sick, dude.
Oh,
Like those guys
Elliot.
knew how to play. Yeah.
And Elliot,
Uh,
he's still like with his little mandolin posting up
yeah.
videos online, just ripping that fucking thing up. He's like, I play this mandolin, but I'm inspired by this Lamb of God song. Check it out.
Yeah, exactly, man. Right, like, and I love, for example, I love Strung Out. Right, like, I also grew up like listening to Big Wig, right, like that sort of stuff. And those fucking guys like know how to fucking rock, right? But and going back to that freaking record, right? Like, and I remember that that was kind of like the very first like actively like kind of like decent, right? Like solo, right? Like I'd say that I was like trying to put right like in one record, right? So in that song, like generic, right? Like it's a fantastic song, right? Like it's very sad as well. Um, and but I think like even like the whole vibe, right? Like and I think it's very eerie, kind of like at the same time, right? Like and part of what I wanted, like to showcase, right? Like and at that time, right? Like and it's one of my core beliefs, right? Like is that like we're all fucking humans, right? Like right underneath you, right? Like there's a fucking skeleton, right? Like I don't care, like if you're from Mexico, if you're from the US, right? Like if you're black, white, Asian, right? Like whatever, right? Like if you're transgender, right? Like if you're non-binary, right? Like if you're like heterosexual, whatever, however you want to define yourself, right? Like you're still a motherfucking human, right? Like and beneath like all your skin, right? Like there's only bonds, right? And once you die, man, right? Like that's the only thing that's going to remain here, right? So they cover with the little guys while being like very there, like and it was to me kind of like a color. They said like we're all like just generic human pieces of shit, right? Like there's no one better than us, right? Like there shouldn't be anyone better than us, right? Like and there shouldn't be anybody below us, right? Like we're just as equally as miserable, right? Like as any other person, right? Like in this world. So, but that's a fantastic EP, I think, and that's also a pretty cool song. Right? But that was like the first like really decent solo I say, or like that I put out, right? Like back then. Like I have a question for you because I don't remember this. Right? You probably know this better than I do. It was like the like Vampires, the song from the Cradle to the Rave, right? Like was that already released, right? Like do you happen to know that, or was it around that time?
I think. Ooh, hold on.
Because I don't
I
remember. It's
I
not a big
freshly.
blur for me.
Oh, I think I might have closed. Nope, that tab might still be open. Let's see. Track 14 was taken from the 2011 single. Yeah, that came
Yeah.
out in 2011, before the Planet of the Apes.
All right. So I think that's the first solo, right? Like that I really put out, right? Like, and I was super proud of, right? Like, and a big shout out, like to Kenny, right? Like from Syrup. He now has this band called Equals, like very like electronic dark music, right? Like, so big shout out to him because he was always like super nice, right? Like, so I think that's actually the first one, right? Like, that I really put, right? Like, that I was like very proud of myself. But going back, right? Like, Vampires, right? Like, it's a song from like 2005 originally, rather that I had like recorded, right, like in with Gusto, right, like and that was like one of the decent songs, right, like that we had.
So wait,
So and
so you say
yeah,
that's a Gusto song?
yeah, that was originally like a Gusto song. Yeah,
I'm gonna use that as a lead in for that segment.
that's cool. That's cool. So yeah, it was like from back then, right? Like that song was a Gusto song. In this reality, right? Like from the latest record was also kind of like from those Gusto times. What else? I think there's another song, Cara Cara, which is kind of like from Hollows, right? Like were that series of EPs, right? Like that around that time. So those are kind of like the 3 tracks that were mine, right? Like that I wrote up, because I also don't like to take, right? Like if somebody else wrote those songs, those are their songs, right? Like, but if I wrote this motherfucking tunes, right, those are mine, right? So it's kind of that way, right? Like but yeah, I think it's right from there.
I did an interview with Cinderblock from the band Tilt, and
Oh, nice, it's awesome. Yeah,
right, and
I'm
she
gonna
was
listen to
talking
that.
about some of her early bands that she reused some of the lyrics, and she said those are my lyrics. I'm gonna use them. I don't care if they're pissed.
I can relate, man. I can definitely relate to that, right? Because bottom line, right? Like if you're putting your soul, right, like into that, right? Like you're putting your soul, right, into that piece of music, right? Like that's yours, right? So as long as you're not, right, like stealing, right, like whatever this other person did, right, like or using that, right, like and whatnot, like that's fine, right? Like I think that's cool. Like, but I felt that, and Cinder Blake, like she's great, man. Yeah, I fucking love Tilt as well. It's really good. Gonna check that out.
Word, word. And she just recently did that Green Day cover song with Mike and his uke.
Oh, those freaking covers are amazing, man. I haven't checked that out. Yeah, those
Yeah,
are very cool covers, man.
yeah. What was it? I think she did that Longview cover with him. Yeah, where she sung long.
Nice.
Yeah.
Gotta check that out. Gotta check that out.
Yep,
That's
yep.
cool.
Shout out to Cinder. Woo. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely.
So move on to Jonathan Livingston single.
Ah, that's a tough one for me. Like that's definitely like a very tough one, right? Like so right around that time, right, like when everything was happening, right, like with these releases and whatnot, right, like um my dad was fighting cancer, right? Like and he passed, right? Like right about the time, right? Like I think he passed, right? Like in 2012, right? Like somewhere like around the time, right? Like, so Jonathan Livingston was kind of like a tribute, kind of like in a sense to him, right? Because just going back right, to my childhood and whatever, like my dad has never like put like a finger right like on me, right? Like he was like super cool, right? Like whenever he was around, right? Like and he tried like to like connect with me, right? Like so for example, I freaking love like Spider-Man and the X-Men, right? Like and he used like to get those comic books, right? Like and read those for me, right? So that's sick, dude. That's sick. Yeah, right on, man.
I'm all about
So
the X-Men.
yeah, that's fantastic, man. Like that's pretty neat. But it was because of that he wanted to connect with me as a kid, right? Like so he used like to get this comic book, he would read them first, right? Like, and then he would hand me down those, right? So that I could read them and then we could talk about whatever, right? Because I was also kind of like a strange kid, right? Like I didn't have a lot of friends, right? Like and whatnot. Like, even right now, right? Like I still don't have like that many friends, right? Like and he tried to connect, right? Like with me, like by any means, right? Like so when he died, right, like it was kind of like around that time, right? Like so it was like a very like sensitive time, right? Like, and even a lot of those songs kind of like allude to that. So Jonathan Livingston it's based on a book, right? Like I forgot like the author, right? Like of that book, right? Like at the top of my head. Here in Mexico, it's called like Juan Salvador Gaviota, which is crazy, the different title, right? Like Jonathan Livingston, right? Like so it's about like this seagull, right? Like that just heads on like to the air like and tries like to get as high as he can, right? Like and he doesn't make it, right? Like and he tries goes back, like and every time like he gets knocked back, right? Like he tries like to still go up, right? So it was very meaningful to me as a kid, right? Because back then, right, like I didn't really care about this sort of stuff, but from his perspective, right, like he was trying like to teach me like, hey, whenever you want to achieve something, whenever you want to do something, right, like doesn't matter how hard it gets, right? Like, you still have to push through, right? And by the end of that book, right, like kind of like it's not really like a plot twist or whatever, right? Like it's like he gets right to a different level, right? Like he gets to where he wants to be, and he realizes that there's this other like crazy freaking birds, right? Like in different seagulls, right? Like and they're still trying like to push for higher, right? So it was cool, right? Like, and it was very meaningful to me, right? Like, so I remember that, right? Like, it was kind of like a part of my memories, right? Like with him, right? Growing up. So that song, right? Like, is for him, right? Like, and I think it says like that I remember like smoking with him, right? Because we used to smoke, right? Like I got like into smoking, right? Because of like I wanted like to be a grown up, right? Like kid, right? Like with my shitty ass friends, right? Like in middle school,
Are
whatever.
we talking tobacco?
Like we're talking tobacco, right? Like, but yeah, right? Like, but I also did like smoke a lot of other things, right? So, and but yeah, right, like we used to like just like smoke cigarettes, right? Like and talk about like bullshit, right? Like in just hanging out, right? Like I remember like when I was a kid, like he bought me like an NES, right? Like just to play, right? Because I didn't have like any friends, so he was like, right, like you're gonna stay here, like but at least play, right? Like some video games or whatever, right? So he was very kind to me, and again, like he never touched me, right? Like my mom like used to beat me up, right? Like with the belt or whatever, right? Like and that's cool, right? Like and it's something from a different era, right? Like again, but he never did that, right? Like and he was always trying like to get to know me, like to know what I like, right? Like with the same with the music, right? Like, he was all right. So listen to this, check this out. So when he passed, right, like it was very hard, right, for me, right, like at the time. So I did that song, right? Like in that's one, if not really my favorite, like song like that I have ever done because of that, but also because it has like a lot of interesting like melodies, right? Like in changes, right? Like and you can tell, right? Like if you're listening, right, like with headphones and whatnot, like one guitar is doing this other shit, right? Like and one guitar is doing this other shit, right? Like and you have like the bass in the middle, right? Like coming up with something different. And to me, right, like and right about that time, that's when I kind of like started like to playing more with harmonies, right? Like what you can I again I think I'm a awful just guitar player, right? Like I'm not the best, right? Like I really suck at guitar playing, but I think I'm a very good composer,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And especially when it comes like to harmonies and shit, right? Like I fucking like get into that, right?
Yeah,
So
your theory is on point still.
that's good. It's good. So that's it. I love that, right? Like I really love that, right? Like in that song, like in particular, like what's very meaningful to me, right? Like and still is, right? Like it has like a lot of good melodies, right? Like but at the same time, it's just a loop, right? Like of everything that's going on. Right, like, and it's going back right to that bossiness. Right, like, all right, I have two chords. Right, like I'm gonna just strum this up. Right, like again and again. Right, again, I don't have like to take this elsewhere. I'm gonna keep it here, kind of keep it simple, and it doesn't mean that it's not gonna be like a good song or whatever. Right. So I really love that.
Yeah, it's great stuff. It's great stuff. And then the Tracy P in same year, 2013, later on in the year, right?
Yeah, man.
What was that? Was that the one that featured Chet from Stupid Henchman?
I think so, right? Like I think so, but because like the song that had like Chad was like on that beats, right? And that's a sick freaking song, man. And I wanted like to have him there, right? Like and I wanted because he has like those qualities, kind of like I'm not the best, kind of like at rapping and shit, right? Like I tried to give it a shot, right? Like, but he gets that down, right? Like, and I want like, and his screams, like, and everything, like, he's super fantastic, like, working around like that sort of stuff, right? Like, and like the bridge had that, right? Like, and I wanted somebody, right, like, to get on that, but I also wanted like to get like the henchman, right? Because I had done like a cover of them, right? Like before, like kind of like 2 years early for a tribute or something, right? Like, and I really wanted like to get in that, like, and I think, for example, like this is very important, right? Because he came down to Mexico like a few years ago, right? Like, and I wasn't here, like at the time, right? Like, so I couldn't see him, right? Like, and it would have meant like the world, like to me, just like to get a like to talk, right? Like get some beers, or like whatever, right? Like just hang out, talk about music, right? Like talk about this business, right? Like this type of music, right? Like and have a good time, right? But I didn't get to see him, but hopefully not so far into the future, right? Like we'll be able to do that. But I think like that song, right, like was released as a single, right? Like, and I think it came in that one, right? Like I'm not so sure, man, right? Like that's very
I'm sorry. I did cram a bunch of research in a short time period, but that's kind of my thing. That's kind of my thing. Uh, right. And I was trying to discern it all today because the Hollows was was a wonderful collection of most all of these EPs and singles, but it was hard for me to find the individual uh
releases.
releases by themselves, you know. So that took some hunting. So I might be a little off with which tracks are coming from where, you know.
It's all right. It's all right.
Uh,
I don't remember either.
right. And right before you released the Hollows, you released pop melodies filled with hate, which is
Yeah,
another collection of a bunch of old
yeah.
tracks.
So yeah, that's basically right, like the pop melody is filled with hate, right? It was like a way like to centralize like everything, right? Like and just have it there. You get like the first stuff like from the very first like record, like the cool tracks, like and I think I now that I had like a decent computer, right, like I went ahead, like and mixed it a little bit better. Because there were like some tracks that you can't listen, right? Like without listening your ear, like those were harsh, like times, right? So there were like a couple of tracks that were very rough. So I just wanted like to mix them a little bit better, like so that they're more ear friendly, right? So that's how that came out. Well, again, I tried to select as well kind of like the songs that we were playing live at the time. Well, because we had like this band, well, again, a big shout out like to all the past like AV members, right? Like, especially my brother. Right? Like he was like the best like bass player ever. Right? Like he was able like to put up like with my bullshit, right? Like, and play this faster, do this, right? Like and whatever. Like, but he was also helping me out, right? Like to get onto these shows, right? Like and book this sort of stuff. So, but we had like a lot of drummers. Like it's a big shout out, like to all of them. Like they were pretty cool. Never had like a bad drummer, right? Like so that's something I'm pretty good proud of. Right? Like all the drummers that we had, like were very good. So this was kind of like the set list, right? That we're doing kind of like live, right? Like back then. So yeah, like because I think like that one starts with "I'm so sick of you," right? Like so that was like the opener,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like that's like how we started like our shows, right? Like just to get like the ball running, right? Like and people wouldn't expect that, right? Like at the time, right? Because it just starts like screaming, and you're like, all right, I guess they're going, right? Like and that was cool.
Tell me about this Raz Misery release of that Nintendo Core shit you were doing.
Yeah. So that's another thing, right? Because I was like, I've always loved like video game music, right? Like, and I always loved like vegan, especially like old school shit, right? Like NES, like Super NES, right? Like that type of vibe, right? Like even Game Boy, right? Like sounds. And again, right? Because I'm not right, like to me, right? Like I feel like even like within punk rock, like you get a lot of pressure right, from people, right? Like, oh shit, are you listening to this band? Right? Like you're not punk enough, right? Like you should be listening to this shitty ass band right, like, that nobody has heard about. Oh, right, like are you wearing like that there t-shirt that you print yourself? You should be supporting this band. Right? Like, motherfucker, I don't have the money, right? Like perhaps I don't like this shit. Right? Like doesn't change the fact that I listen to punk rock, right? Like it, you can be whatever you want, right? Like I don't fucking care. Just let me be as well, right? If I want to wear it like this, like if I'm not wearing a fucking vest, if I'm not wearing like the pin of this wife band, right? Like these are not like Vision shoes, like vegan or whatever, right? Like and like, dude, like just let people be, right? Like enjoy whatever things that they're enjoying, right? Like as long as they're not messing with you, as long as they're not putting anybody, right, like into any kind of harm, right? Like or being like super negative, right? Like about like bullshit, right? Like or like being like bigots, right? Like racist, whatever, right? Like that's fine, right? Like enjoy your shit, right? Like if you like something, just enjoy that, right? Like so I've always loved that, right? Like, and I love to listen, like, to it could be like the most popular shit ever, right? Like, and it could be like the hardest, like, fucking grindcore shit, right? So, in I've always like dwelled, right, like into these different things, right? Like, so I got like into kind of like cheap tunes and shit, right? Like around that time, right? Like listening to a lot of bands, right? Like, that were doing like music with their Game Boys, right? And I always wanted like to incorporate that like into Anti-Venom as well, right? But it didn't like kind of like present itself right, like properly. Like for whatever reason, right? Like I wasn't able like to mix and match, right? So yeah, like so I was like, all right, like I'll try this out. Right? Like and I started like doing like these versions, right? Like of AV songs, right? Like or whatever, right? And I thought that those were like very cool, right? Like I think like there's some cool versions, right? Like for some Anti-Venom songs that way. And I wish that somebody like could actually like use this like for a freaking like retro video game or whatever, right? Like I think that would be kind of like super neat, right? So, but that's how that came out to be, right? Like, but and I didn't release that neither kind of like as Anti-Venom, right? Because to me it was like, oh, this is different. And like I don't want to like make people think, all right, this motherfucker, because of that like same mentality, right? Like now this band, right, like is doing something different to what I like them to do. I'm not gonna be listening to them anymore, right? Just kind of like that sense of also like entitlements. Like for example, like I hate like and nothing against anybody, right? Like that has like this feeling, right? Like, but you know when AFI like became like super mainstream and shit, right? Like that they started like doing like this Miss Murder shit, right? Like and whatever. Like there were like a lot of people were like, no, like they stopped playing hardcore and shit, right? Like, dude, have you listened to Sing the Sorrow? Like that's the most amazing record they've ever released, dude. And even right, like whatever they're doing right now, it might not be your cup of tea, right? Like, but like they're still doing what they want, right? So let's just appreciate right, like whatever it is that they enjoy to do. You have your right not to do or not to listen to that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're entitled to say like or to dictate what the band should be playing, right? Like, but at the same time, as a musician, you know, right? Like shit. Now people are expecting me to follow this path, right? Like or this trend, right? Like so. If I were like to put something like that at the time, I like nowadays I wouldn't care, right? Like it's like this is what you get, right? Like this is what I'm doing, like so this is AV 2024, right? Like so, but back then, right, like, I was kind of self conscious about that, so I wanted like to have that differentiation, right, like, between projects and shit.
Word. Gotta make a note about it, but tell me about Coconut Destroyer.
Ah, that's a fantastic thing, right? Like so, I like the Coconut Destroyer, like, and it's also kind of like pun, right? Like on the name, right? Like on these bands, right? Like because I think like those bands are cool, right? Like, but again, right? Like there's a lot of people like putting like into pressure, like the DV sound, right? Like and shit, right? Like and all these bands, like with the this at the beginning, like Discharge, right? Like and whatnot, right? Like and so it was kind of like my pun into that, right? So this is the Coconut Destroyer, right? And I did that, right? Like I think I heard NoFX like record like one of their EPs, like the Fuck the Kids EP or something like that, right? Again in 1 week, right? Like because they wanted like to go back like to punk rock shit and whatnot.
Is this
So I
the Suffer EP?
this surfer, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like so, and I wanted like to do something like that, like because I wanted like to challenge myself. Like, what can you come up with, like with just 1 week? Right? Like, what are the songs that you can create, right? Like with just 1 week, right? Like, and I was like, all right, well, like, and that was the Coconut Destroyer, right? Like, those were the songs, like which turned out to be like super like hardcore, like grindy, crusty tracks, right? Like, and and I just released it, right, like as Kako the Destroyer, like because of that separation, right? Like I want like to be it separated from AB, right? Like, and but then again, it's because of that own kind of like state of mind, right? Like at the time, I'm like, oh shit, other people are not gonna like this because this is way harder than it is, right? Like, and that's why I had like under a different name, right? Like just trying like to make fun, right? Like of the whole this thing. So yeah, but it was fun, right? Like and that's there, right? Like, but the sound is very rough, right? Like, but it's because again, it was done like in 1 week, right?
Yeah, it
So,
turned
but
out it sounded it was a fun it sounded like a fun pretty fun album to make.
yeah, it was cool. It was a very good record, man. I like that. So,
And let's come around to this latest release, Handful of Nothing. Um how was it that so being so inspired by Choking Victim to get into work with Squirt Gun, how was that?
it was fantastic, man. Right? Like, that record, like it took ages. Like, in all honesty, like it took ages since the last release. Like more than 10 years, I think. And it was because like a rough bad, right? Like I had like a very rough bad, right, like throughout that time. Right? Like I remember like I lost my job, right? Like I don't remember the year. I don't want to remember the year, right? Like, but I lost my job, right? Like in I was like unemployed for about 2 years, right? And for anybody kind of like is struggling, right? Like getting a job and whatnot, right? Like right? Like that it's kind of hard. Like you're stretching like your freaking credit card, like as much as you can, like, just to like meet ends. Right? Like you're asking people for money, right? Like, and it's like the most kind of like I don't know why it's so shameful, right? Like to do that, right? But it feels that way. Like, excuse me, would you mind like borrowing me, right? Like some cash, right? Like and whatnot. So I was like, I had to sell my dad's record collection. He had like I don't know how many vinyls, right? Like he left me, right? Like so I had to sell that, right? Like and that's a rough time. Like then I remember like I lost like a touch like with a couple of my best friends like because other shit went down, right? Like and it was like a very rough patch for me, right? Like but uh, I was listed like writing like these songs right, like, that ended up like being like a handful of nothing, right? Like throughout that time. And luckily, right, like in knock on wood, right, like everything is going smoothly, right, like in terms of like money, right, like work, right, like in relationships, right, like family, all that sort of shit, right, like everything's looking good. Right, but now I just don't have the time, right, to do a lot of stuff. But it took forever, right? Like a lot of those songs, right, like I kid you not, right, like I had like the basically like the final version, right, like minus the vocals since around like 2019 or 2020, right? So I remember for that specific record, like I wanted like to get not only Squirt, like because I thought like shit, like Thermonuclear Wasteland, like it's a fantastic track, like and I think like it's like the classic AV sound, like what people really like from Anti-Venom. So I wanted like to have like someone like that had inspired like that sound, like and I really wanted like that and I just messaged him, right? Like, and I was like, hey, dude, like, and that's what I do, right? Like, I had like collaborations, right, with Dead Rejects, right, with Suicide Victims, right, like with C-Rave, The Night Guns, right, like, and that's what I do, right? Like, I feel like, and also, right, like, for people, right, like, perhaps not your normal listeners, right? Like, I feel like they're more in touch, like, with this type of shit, right? Like, but there's like this heavy disconnect, right? Like, people think that like bands are in a different plane, right? Like, or that like artists are like these crazy musicians, like not punk rockers, my dude, right? Like, if you're like getting like super, if you're filling up stadiums, yeah, maybe, right? But like for freaking punk rockers, man, right? Like they have like to have like a day job, right? Like to meet their end, right? Like that's how it goes, right? Like it even like the super like most fantastic bands, like they have to have like a freaking day job, right? So and with that in mind, they also like humans, right? Like again, just going back to that thing, right? Like we're all motherfucking humans, right? Like it, even right, like if you're like, oh shit, right? Like this is like the craziest person, right? Like, that ever like set foot on earth, right? Like and whatever, like this, he's the best musician. Like that motherfucker still has like to take a shit, right? So that's how it is, right? Like nobody is better, right? Like we shouldn't like personally force like ourselves like, yes, my lord, right? Like or whatever, right? Like we're just humans, right? Like we all have like a suffering, right? We all like feel bad, right? For shit. So I just message people, right? Like if I want like to do that, right? Like and to give you another idea, I also like message like Ezra, like to collaborate in another track, right? Like of that record, right? Which was like I think it was Sarah Bass, right? Like Sarah Bass. Um I wanted Ezra like to sing some verses as well, right? Like so it didn't pan out, right? Like hopefully, right? Like Ezra, if you're listening, I love freaking Morning Glory, right? So and especially now, right? Like that he's sober and shit, right? Like I've also had like my good fur, right? Like of fun times, right? Like to say the least, right? Like with drugs, right? Like alcohol, right? Like and I get it, like and for everybody like that's battling that sort of stuff, like it's always hard, like, but don't lose hope, right? Like you're the only one person that can change that, right? Like for you, right? Like and if you still want to party, right on, right? Like just don't be a dick to people, right? Like have fun, right? Like enjoy your time, but just don't go crazy, right? Like or like like those are bad things, right? Like some people like tend to steal shit, right? Like they get like really hard, right? Like they end up in very bad places.
It's a
So
slippery slope. It's a slippery slope.
yeah,
I
man.
lost many of friends. They
I know.
they started off as my friends, then they weren't my friends, and then now they're not even people now.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you, my dude. And
That,
it's a
that
shame, right?
yeah, that's one of the whole reasons I started this whole interviewing bands anyway, because it was I had a friend, my best friend Steve. Every time I discovered a new band, I'd come to him excited, be like, "Hey, check out this band," right? And I'd tell him all about this band, and like even the last time I saw him, I was telling him about this crazy French band called Igor, right? Which is like a baroque breakcore crazy shit, right? With like
Yeah,
operatic vocals and whatnot. And then he just couldn't stop taking them opiates, you know? Uh and now I don't have my friend Steve, so I started this album of the month thing to just try to tell people about these
that's cool.
crazy albums I had was coming up with or coming across. And then I just wanted to create some more content, so I started interviewing the people that are creating,
That's rad, man. That's
right.
that's fantastic.
And you're right, people are just people, because I've discovered that as I'm doing this, because like I just reached out to you and you're totally down. Like everyone I've interviewed. Uh Milo from the Descendants granted me an interview and I only had 16 subscribers.
That's sick, man. Like that's it. Like you just have like to push through, man. Right? Like, and I'm very sorry, like to hear about your friend. Right? Like, I feel you, right? Like in that sense. There have been like several people who are like not only like to drugs, right? Like or to other causes, right? Like that perhaps can like affect like the YouTube thing. So I'm not gonna speak of those, right? Like but I feel you're like in I feel like for anybody, right? Like that's something that I've always kind of like tried to push, right? Like when it comes like to this music, right? Because it has happened to me, right? Like that I get like a message, right? And because I'm not out there, right? Like all the times and whatnot, right? Like I had like a few messages like from people like your music has resonated with me, right? Like or I love this because it makes me feel happy, right? Like and I'm having like a very rough time. And sometimes like I haven't been able kind of like to respond them on time or like a shit like that. But at the same time later on I find out like a couple of those people right like have unfortunately are no longer with us, right? So it's kind of like a very hard thing, right? Like not to make mention of that when it comes like to this and even like punk rock, right? Like grindcore, right? Like these type of genre, right? Like and this type of music, right? Like it's very like intimate, right? Like in that sense, right? Like it deals with a lot of emotional struggles, right? Like so if anybody right, like is out there like fighting the fight, right? Like don't give up, right? Like I know it's kind of hard, right? Like I know it's kind of hard. Like I know it's kind of like just saying like a tagline or whatever, but do reach out, right? Like reach out for help, reach out to your friends, reach out to your family, right? Like reach out to even like those just fucking lines, right? Like to talk with others, right? Like they're always something good. Um, but yeah, right? Like in it's very good, right? Like it's a lot going on, right? Like in this set, right? Like in this part of the conversation, right? Like, because yeah, right, like people are just people, right? Like, and going back to that, like, and how Richard like to squirt, right? Like, and I was like super down, right? Like, he was like, for sure, man, right? Like, and I was like, yeah, right. But I tried to play it cool still, right? Like, I want like to give, all right, awesome, man, right? Like, whatever, right? But I was like shitting my pants, because he's the man, right? Like, he's legit, right? Like, and his last like separate records, right? Like, he sent that to me, like before it was out, right?
That
Like, and he
Public
was like,
Serpent.
yeah, man. He was like, "Hey, do you want to check out the new Serpent Dragon?" I was like, "Yeah, don't share it with anybody." I was like, "I want, right? Like, trust me, I want." Right? Like, and I was like listening in the car, right? Like, and with my brother, right? Like, I was like, "Dude, like, this is sick." Right? Like, and we're listening to that thing, right? Like, over and over again. Right? Like, and I was just messaging him, right? Like, and it's just that, right? Like, having like that connection. So that's pretty much how all my collaborations have gone through. Right? Like, I just reach out to the band, right? Like, tell them like, "Hey, I'm this guy from Mexico, right? Like, would you be down, right? Like, to sing with me, right? Like, or to do something?" And most of the time, so like they are, right? Like, even if they can't, right? Like, for example, I've always wanted like to have like a collaboration with Crowley, like from Ghetto Blaster, now Big Brother and shit. Like, I also like used to message with him all the time, like back in the day, right? Again, for whatever reason, right? Like, we couldn't make it, right? Like at the time. So hopefully, like something new, right? Like coming up later on. Fingers crossed, really that's the case. But it's like that, right? Like, I think a handful of nothing, like it's a very, I don't know, man. Like I'm still kind of like fresh, right? Like in that record, like even though like it took me ages, right? Like it's still kind of like fresh in my mind, like having like to build that up, right? Like and releasing that, right? Like, and I think like there's so many fantastic songs, really. I at the same time also I have like a lot of outtakes, right? Because I wanted like to have like a very good record, right? Like it's like a full on like
Oh yeah,
a album,
that
right?
album fucking slaps, man.
Thanks, thank you, man. I do appreciate it, right? Like, and that's one what I wanted like to create with that one, right? Like, and you want to have like, all right, like these are the cool songs, and these are the rest, right? Like, I wanted like to be cohesive, right? Like in the sense that how it starts, like how it ends, right? Like something as silly, right? Like this is just silly to me, right? But from an artistical, right, like standpoint, whatever you want to call that, right? Like the very first like line on the record, right? Like it's like it ends like this, right? Like so that's the very first line, and that was intentional to put like that, right? Because the album also ends right, with a similar line, right? But it's kind of like it starts with this, right? Like or something, right? Like, so it's kind of like a weird connection, right? Like kind of like turning that out, right? Like so, it's kind of like that, right? Like I just want like to have a lot of things like put in there, right? Like that builds up to something, right? Like and I think like I don't know, man. I really love that record, so I'm very happy like to talk about that thing. So it's a very good record, and I don't know, man. Like I think there's a lot of songs that I really enjoy.
Yeah, possibly your best release so far. Possibly.
Thanks.
Like I said, I fucking love that album. I already wore out my let's see, Bandcamp only gives you 3 listens before it starts harassing you. And I already wore it out on my my Safari on my phone as well as my Google on my phone.
So it's on YouTube as well, right? Like I upload
Well,
like all the different tracks, right? Like there, like anybody can listen like anywhere. So I appreciate it, man.
right. It hasn't found its way to the YouTube music platform yet. Like all your other albums are listed up there, but that new one, it is on YouTube. I did find it this morning, but it was a different link to a different playlist that wasn't linked to your YouTube music because I don't use Spotify. I
Oh,
use
gotcha.
I use that YouTube music more than anything else. But I managed to find it. Like I fucking love that album. I love that album. Like I said, it might be your best release so far. The fucking mixes are great, and in your fucking, like I said, your musical theory is on point. Like I've
Thank you.
noticed you do tend to savor that major scale more than the minor, right? But it makes
Yeah.
the harmonies come out nice, you know?
Yeah, I love that. Right? Like in for example, like I don't know like a whole lot, right? Like of music theory, right? Like and shit, right? Like I've learned like as I go, right? Like, and I never, if you ask me, like, hey, play like a D, right? Like in the guitar, like, I will struggle, right? Like to say, all right, E, I'll go like this, right? Like until I get like to that D, right? Because I don't know shit, right? Like, and it's cool, right? Like, but because I feel like if I were to know more, right, like about that, right, like in proper scales, right, like in different techniques and whatnot, right, I would like have like my grip on that, right, like, and I wouldn't be as creative, I think. And but I know kind of like the difference between major and minor scales, right, like, and whatnot. So I know really that I hit that hard, like frequently. I feel like that's also kind of like within my voice range nowadays, right? And I love how it sounds, right? Like, and I want to like to do something like very different, right? Like, for example, even when I first released, right, like, the first track, which was like Dorothy Gale, right? Like, I'm also kind of like a super huge like Wizard of Oz like fan, right? Like ever since I was a kid, like I remember watching like this '90s cartoon, like, and I was like, holy shit, like this is just crazy, right? Like, then later on, like I read the books, right, like, and whatnot, and I was like, this is some heavy stuff, right? Like right here, like doesn't seem like it, right? Like, but there's a lot of pretty cool topics, right? I can run that, right? Like, and a lot of these specific records, right? Like are stories, right? Like, that I try like to build. Like I knew for a fact that I didn't want to talk about like politics in this record, right? Like because yeah, right, like to me, right, like that's as played out, right, like as any love song, right? Like especially when it comes like to this type of music, right? Like, all right, let's release like another song against capitalism. Fuck yeah, right? Like how interesting can we get, right? Like dude, like we've talked about this, right? Like if people don't want to take action, right, like that's fine, right? Like, but we have like to move on. It's the same as oh, let's have another love song, right? So to me, it has grown like to be kind of like that way, right? Like nothing against like anybody, right? Like anybody has like the right like to do and sing and talk about whatever the fuck they want, right? But I wanted like to build something different. Again, at the same time, like I just want like to talk a few songs about myself. So songs like Dorothy Gale, right? Like are kind of like interpretations, right? Like of sad, like a sad interpretation of the Wizard of Oz, right? Like especially for example, like when it comes like to a very nasty situation here in Mexico, right? Like it's that there's a lot of like women being killed, right? Like very close to the border, and even right here in the city, right? Like there's hundreds, thousands of women, right? Like being murdered like every freaking day, right? And there's no freaking action, right? Like from like the government, right? Like there's no justice departments, right? Like, and that's something what happens, right? Like, and when you start reading into these things, right? Like, it's a very sad thing, right? Like, what happens, right? Because for a lot of these women, right? Like, they get them out of their houses, right? By the promise, like, hey, you're gonna be earning some money, you're gonna have a good time, we're gonna do this, right? Like, so I try like to like think about like in a different way, like all right, so it's like going like to this place like with the Wizard of Oz like place with us, right? Like it's like going into this path, right? It's like yellow brick, right? You're gonna follow, you're gonna discover like this thing that's like the Emerald City, right? You're gonna have fun, then you can wish for whatever you want, right? Like, and unfortunately that's not the case, right? Like unfortunately these women are tragically like murdered, right? Like, and there's nobody talking about that, and there's like just these awful reports, like in the news and whatnot, right? So I wanted like to talk about something in a different way. Like, let's go into this fake land, right? Like that will get you like fun. You're gonna have like some pills. You're gonna get like to drink. And bottom line, you're gonna end up dead, right? So super sad. Right? Like the same goes for other tracks, like within this record, right? Like that are talking about like other very interesting topics, like for example like Broadway, right? Like it's about like transgender rights, right? Like there's like these they're the two main characters, right? Like it's this rat named Benjamin, right? Like that she's a rat, right? Like, and because that's how she wants like to be addressed, like she's Benjamin, right? Like she's Benji for friends, right? Like, and I made like a remark, and he loves like this queer guy, right? Like, and whatnot, right? Like, and but they want to take over like this super crazy ass playing Broadway, right? Like, and it's a very cool song, but it talks about like how this rat, right, like in this case, right, like has and needs, right, like to do whatever they need, right, like to feel and be who they whatever the fuck they are, right, like, and there's nobody else to judge them, and if that's going to put into chaos how other people feel, right, like, well, let's bring the chaos over, right, like let's bring it on, right, because these things are not going to be changing for anybody, right, like these are the new things, the new normal things that everybody at this point in time in 2023 should be accepting, right? Like if someone wants to be called however they want to be called, if they want to use like any pronouns that they want to be using, right? Like there shouldn't be a problem for me. There shouldn't be a problem for you. There shouldn't be like a problem for anybody, right? We're just, again, we're humans, right? And we all deserve to be treated with respect, decency, right? Like, and whatnot. So this is a very heavy record, right? Like, there's other songs, right? Like I make fun, right, like of that, right? Like other aspect, right? Like about politics, right? Like in all these bands, right? Like with sounds the same or all the same, right? Like which is like this super electronic song, right? Like I want like to do something similar to From the Cradle to the Rave, right? Like, but I'm not like super skilled, right? Like at what he's doing, right? Like what he was doing, right? Like 5 years ago, right? Like, and Kenny was the master, right? Like, so I try to do my own version, right? Like, because I like that type of music. I like electronic music. I like this type of stuff. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, let's do something different, even as a community, right? Like, I've heard like a couple of bands that are now including kind of like trap, like drum beats, right? Like in some of their songs. And that's rad, man, right? Like, if you can bring that like to punk rock, right? Like, let's add that, right? Like, let's not just say I freaking love punk rock, like traditional, like that drum beat, right? Like is for me is like the best thing ever, right? Like, but that doesn't mean that I cannot hear like or I don't want to hear something else, right? So and the same goes, right? Like everything sounds the same here and there, right? Like you hear like this one, all right, this sounds like X, right? Like you hear this other thing, all right, this sounds like that, or reminds me of that. Let's be creative. Let's try to do something else. But like what at the same time, like it's very like redundant because I'm trying to sound like somebody else. Right? Like, so it's like very hypocritical in that sense, right? Like about that song. But that's how I wanted like to explore like other subjects, right? Like within this particular record, and it's very cool, right? Like and even like the first song, like a handful of nothing, or like I think like it's like such a great banger, just to start this because like that's the most punk rock like 90s, like Wagon, right? Like no effects in parts song, like Bad Religion style, right? Like type of track, right? Like and I love that shit, right? Like, that's how I grew up, right? Like, and I still love like those bands, right? I'm wearing a freaking Joy Cape like t-shirt, right? Like because I love like Wagon, right? Like I love his other stuff, so it's a pretty interesting record, right? Like, and it's I've been very fortunate, right? Like to be received, right? Like with good praise, right? Like for that, very nice comments here and there, right? Like and I love that, right? Like, and again, a big shout out, right? Like, to Tommy, right? Like the Corrupt Vision, right? Because they're not only right, like doing like the No Times record, right? But they're also again like going right, like into this right, like fight, right? And putting up like the transgender right, like stuff, right? Like out there up front, right? Because there's not a lot of bands doing that, right? Like, and it's not that doesn't mean that oh now everybody has to no, right? Like if you believe in whatever it is that you're believing, right? Like let's fucking do it, right? And they do believe in that, right? Like and they're pushing for that, right? Like so that's fantastic, right? And the minute I messaged him, right? Like and I was like, hey, check this out, right? Like I have this new record after 10 fucking years, right? Like and I was like, right, let's do a tape. And I was like, awesome, right? Like let's freaking do it, right? Like let's do a freaking tape, right? And it's just great, right? Like it's been just great, right? Like and right now I'm just like trying to figure it out because I have a lot of outtakes, right? Because I want like to have like this very condensed like record, right? And have it like exactly as I wanted it to be. but I have like other songs that didn't make it, right? That are already recorded, right? Like, and they're very good, but they just weren't for this, right? Like I have like this super like nasty like metal song, right? Like there, right? Like which is called like part-time fuckboy, right? Like that's the title of that song, right? Like and talks about like other shit, right? Like about like motherfuckers, right? Like just like playing dumb, right? Like getting into girls' pants, right? Like just for the fun of it, right? Like and in that sense, right? Like and it's very good, right? But also it's another topic that happens nowadays with social media and bullshit like that, right? Like that there's like a lot of people like trying to push for that, right? Like in like pretty much like being assholes, right? Like to women, right? Like and so it's a lot, right? Like so I have like other songs like Peter and James, which is based kind of like of like Peter Pan, right? Like in the Captain Hook, right? Like so it's a play in that, right? Like either like you grow up like to become a corrupted version, right? Like of someone, right? Like kind of like a pirate, right? Like somebody that doesn't really care, just messes up, or you stay forever fucking young and you refuse like to fucking grow, right? Like, so it's like a different interpretation, right? Like of this subjects, right? Like, doesn't necessarily mean, right? Like that you are kind of like getting into one or the other, right? Like, but there's some people that do, right? Like, and it's not necessarily like the best thing, but it's also doesn't necessarily like the worst thing, right? Like, but something, right? Like that. It's cool to talk about because I don't think a lot of people talk about like this type of stuff. So I'm planning kind of like to release that later on this year, kind of like a single. So like I have like another version of "Today We're Dead," which is from the first record. Like I love that song. That was kind of like another song that I really enjoy playing live. But the version, like in a sense, there's just sucks, right? Like, so I went back when I was recording like this a handful of nothing, so I re-record that. Right? And I was like, yeah, we have something good right now, right? So I want to really release those songs, right? Like and start putting up those new songs, right? Like that didn't make this record, but at the same time, kind of like releasing like kind of like a Hollows version 2 or whatever, right? Like of all these different outtakes, right? Like if for anybody, right? Like because I'm tired, right? Like of having like, hey, here's the Coconut Destroyer, right? Like there's a lot of bangers as well, right? Like I think those are very good songs, right? Again, I want to start incorporating those songs, right? Like into just hey, here's kind of like part 2 of Hollows, right? So here's everything that you might have missed, right? Like and also the covers, right? Like I have like Chucky Bacon cover, I have like the Henshin cover, I have a Devo cover, right?
Yeah, man.
And
Big Mess. You covered Big Mess. You covered
yeah,
Hate the State, right? Fucking yeah, yeah. Uh I'm looking forward to hearing that. All right, I'm excited. I'm excited. Some new fucking tracks.
awesome,
Always
man.
excited.
Soon, hopefully soon, right? Like I just need to have the time, but yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's fucking great to hear. That's great to hear. That eliminates my next question of what do you have coming up. But
Well, hopefully soon. Hopefully soon.
that's awesome.